I think a really important question was posed by our colleague from Montenegro when he spoke about coming to some agreement between, say, Eurostat and the National Statistics Agency. It's really important that there is some convergence here, because otherwise we won't be able to look at what we're actually comparing. And I know this is an issue. I know Commissioner Semeta, I think, is taking this piece of work forward. It is important that we make progress on this so that it's clear for all to see that we are comparing like with like. Mr. Hosey from the UK Parliament spoke about then the single supervisory mechanism and what will follow from that. From the Irish Presidency, I mean, this is going to be a crucial issue because we have found agreement just last December, and we now have to put that agreement in place in discussions with the European Parliament, and that's something that we want to prioritise. The Minister for Finance has said that very clearly indeed. The other two elements of that is how do you come to an agreement in terms of some deposit insurance scheme, and ultimately then how do you agree to resolve a banking issue where that bank creates a difficulty for the national state or indeed for the European Union. We are making progress here. Will this lead to further integration? Yes, is the straight answer. And I think Wolfgang Schäuble, when he was at the last ECOFIN meeting, made that point exactly, that this particular train is leaving the station, and it will be a matter for countries to determine how they will adhere to that. How we actually come to an agreement on this is absolutely crucial to ensure that this crisis never comes back, and that we have the policy instruments at our disposal which is strong enough and firm enough to make sure that we have a banking policy and a banking union which actually says what it's supposed to do. So I think this, if anything we've got to achieve in 2013, it's credibility. And I mean credibility around the question of a banking union which is fit for purpose and which can withstand the shocks that in previous years we were unable to withstand. And there will be questions for countries who do not want to be part of that, or indeed there will be questions for countries because of the domestic banking arrangements within those countries. But I think there is a firm view across the Union that we've got to make progress in this, and that it's something that the Irish Presidency wants to proceed with.
Thank you, Minister. Professor?
And all good questions. To get this question of who controls the controllers, I mean, one issue, of course, is always determining what it is that the controller is supposed to be doing. If it's about independent data, I mean, you need to have some sort of oversight to check to see if the data is still consistently biased. I think in terms of how you do this, I mean, in some member states, that's where the European level has been very useful, because the European level at least offers another level of information of what is happening in specific countries and can help to improve some domestic agencies. I think it goes the other way around. I mean, some of these independent fiscal councils may turn out to be quite useful to think about what it is that the Commission is doing. And in fact, that is something that hasn't been on the table here, but I often wonder is who's checking the Commission, as the Commission has become a much more important player in the most recent reforms. I've always thought that the European Parliament should be doing much more on that, and that you should be holding hearings to check what did the Commission recommend last year. Were there any biases? Were certain countries that have elections not leaned on as much as they could have been? What did they do in terms of follow-up? This is maybe more of a checks and balances type system, but the idea that the Parliament could come and say, well, but how did that other player who's up here at the European level, what exactly did they do, and who's checking them? So, I think you need to take advantage of the different levels of government and use these sorts of proposals where possible to ensure that sort of the controllers, again, are indeed controlled. That's a partial response to your question, too, in terms of what it is that you can do. I would say specifically, at least at the parliamentary.
Thank you very much, Professor. At this moment, I need to excuse Minister Hayes. Thank you very much, Mr. Hayes, for receiving. Thank you. We now proceed on to our next round of questioners, and the next questioner is Mr. Peter Essers of the Netherlands Senate. Sorry, my apologies. It's Mr. Carl Hamilton from Sweden, of the Swedish Parliament. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to talk a bit about Article 13, and in particular there is a French proposal to have a standing committee of a considerable size. Sweden is not a Euro country, and the French proposal would include all Euro countries and European Parliament, and some of us would be outside. That, of course, is not acceptable to us. But I think but I want to underline what I said before, that although Sweden is not a Euro country, we are very interested and very keen to make sure that the Euro area functions and works as well as possible, because that is very important to us. Now, on this type of standing committee, we have a parallel construction between foreign affairs committees and defense committees, and I must say that that is not such an encouraging experience to compare, to see how that has worked, and I've been a member of it too. I think it is very important that we do not construct new elaborate bureaucracies in terms of committees, standing committees, but rather that we take as our point of departure today's needs, and no excessive number of meetings and size of meetings and number of people involved. It is our needs now and in the coming years that should be decide the format, rather than trying to have a kind of master plan for a longer period. So informal and demand-driven cooperation, that would be not only mine but the Swedish Parliament's views. We have discussed this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Peter Essers of the Netherlands Senate. Mr. Essers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I would like to comment on the role of national parliaments in the EU economic governance, and especially on the role of the Article 13 meeting. Last year, the Dutch Senate has asked the Dutch Council of State for a memorandum of explanation with respect to the strengthening of democratic control on reform and economic governance in the EU in order to combat the financial and economic crisis. In this memorandum, the Council of State stressed the need to strengthen democratic legitimacy and strengthen the involvement of EU citizens. According to the Council, the position of national parliaments in the EU decision process needs further attention. And Article 13 might lead to an improvement of the position of national parliaments. However, if Article 13 only leads to meetings of members of national parliaments and the European Parliament, in which they only exchange view without any consequences, this will not lead to a strengthening of democratic control. It might even lead to more democratic alienation. It is important that national parliaments are taken seriously by national governments with respect to decisions on an EU level that affect the national budget. This needs consultation of national parliaments by governments in an early stage, a stage before the negotiations with the Commission start. In this way, these governments can take the view of the national parliaments into account in these negotiations. In this view, the Article 13 meeting could be seen as an opportunity for members of national parliaments to report on this process in their own country. In such a meeting, they can evaluate the decision-making process in their country and the role of the national parliament in this process. It could also lead to a better position of the national governments in the negotiation process with the European Commission. But it could also lead to a weaker position if they seem not to take national parliaments serious enough and they do not look for any support of these national parliaments. And I'm looking forward to the view of Ms. Hallebreuk in this proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Essers. Next speaker is Ms. Kristina Skowronska.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The European Union is changing rapidly. Since the outbreak of the crisis, we are taking serious actions to strengthen the economic governance, reduce public debts, improve competitiveness in Europe. This process leading to the deepening of the integration of the monetary and economic union needs to have a proper democratic legitimacy. In this context, it is crucial to increase the role of the parliamentary dimension of the European Union. Especially, it reflects to the Article 13 of the Treaty on Stability, Cooperation and Governance in the Economic and the Monetary Union concerning the new interparliamentary concerns on budgetary and economic effects. It's vital that such conference be established as soon as possible. However, we should consider combining it with the existing forms of interparliamentary cooperation, for instance, finance committee meetings or meetings on the Europe semester. I hope we could reach a compromise on the matter of the conference, and I look forward to the conclusions of the speakers' conference in April in Nicosia, where Article 13 will be discussed. Thank you for your attention.
Professor.
Well, there are several comments about Article 13 of the Fiscal Compact. That's not what I was directly presenting, so this is a bit of an editorial, I guess. And also, there's a discussion of the role national parliaments can do to be in terms of strengthening accountability and the like. I just want to be very clear about the main point that I had is it's very important to have national parliamentary committees look at what their governments are saying to the EU level, and then when things come back from the EU level, that there's national level accountability. What happens in terms of Article 13 when this big committee gets formed, of course, this is something that still has to be decided among you and among others in terms of what this thing ultimately has to look like. So it could be part of it, existing interparliamentary meetings, it could be part of other things. I just have one concern, I guess I would express to the gentleman from Sweden. I mean, to the extent, and this is all hard to predict, but to the extent that the Eurozone develops further, I'm always worried about, well, who's holding some of these institutions to account? And if it's the full European Parliament, there is a question of, are they really truly being held to account? There have been proposals to have sort of Eurozone members of the European Parliament deal with some Eurozone issues that should at least be thought through further. You referred to something, it sounds a bit more informal, to already take that step. That step you suggested looking at today, you can't do that yet today. I guess I am talking a bit more in the future, but to the extent there are more things that happen under, for example, in terms of how the two-pack procedure is used, who's going to hold that procedure to account? There needs to be someone. And I guess I'm always worried that if the discussions are, well, there's the ins and the outs, and therefore we're not going to do anything, that the default is the status quo, that nothing gets done, that level of accountability won't be provided. And that doesn't benefit anyone, as you yourself pointed out. You know, everybody benefits from a healthy Eurozone. And so there has to be some way, indeed, to hold these sorts of procedures to account, and that may end up being a subset rather than the full set of members. But that's more of an editorial, not based on what I presented.
Our next question here is Ms. Valerie Rabou.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. J'ai deux questions très concrètes, donc ça va être assez rapide. Le premier porte sur les slides que vous avez présentés, notamment sur la question de savoir si les comités débattaient ou non des recommandations du Conseil. Et on voit qu'il y a une grande majorité de pays pour lesquels ce n'est pas le cas. Donc j'aurais souhaité avoir votre précision là-dessus, notamment parce que je trouve que la France est concernée. Et par rapport aux autres décisions ou préparations qui peuvent être prises, on voit que c'est une grande majorité qui ne discute pas après les décisions proposées par le Conseil. Et puis l'autre question porte sur la mise en place de la conférence budgétaire interparlementaire telle que prévue par l'article 13, puisqu'effectivement pour le mois d'avril, il doit y avoir un rassemblement à la fois de représentants des parlements nationaux et du Parlement européen. Donc j'aurais souhaité savoir, connaître l'état d'avancement de cette réunion qui normalement devrait être prévue pour le printemps.
Thank you, Mr. Rabou. Our next questioner is Lord Lyden Henry Harrison, the United Kingdom House of Lords.
Mr. President, I too would like to comment on my colleague, Mr. Hamilton from Sweden's observation that it would be a bad thing to have a separate standing committee concerned with the euro, and even Professor Hallerberg's suggestion, which I think he made right at the end, of a subset, I think would be dangerous and I think should be avoided. Many years ago, when I served in the European Parliament, I was a member of the monetary subcommittee of the then Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee that held hearings to listen to Monsieur Lamfalussy, who eventually became president of the European Monetary Institute, then Mr. Duisenberg, and then Mr. Trichet, who became presidents of the European Central Bank. Now we have this further development with Mr. Draghi assuming a function which wasn't usual before. Whilst I believe the inviolability of the ECB president and his colleagues to take the decisions on monetary matters, I do think it's reasonable and proper that we have proper parliamentary oversight of the function to supervise the banks. I'm very pleased to report that Dr. Constantiou, who's the deputy to Mario Draghi, came before my committee to discuss the European Banking Union. Not only was he there for 1.5 hours to be very frank to us about developments, but also he showed a very commendable readiness to come back and speak again to the national parliament, which was in this case represented by the House of Lords. This leaves a residual problem. I think the European Parliament is the natural place to do these matters, but it must be buttressed and helped by the national parliaments as well as to help the European Parliament. The problem is if you have 27 and 28 national parliaments, how will Mario Draghi and Dr. Constantiou keep up with themselves and not make decisions they should be making if they are having to report to all these national parliaments? So there is a problem, but I do think it's a commendable approach that the ECB have taken, because I know that Mario Draghi appeared before the Bundestag in a 2-hour private session, which again I think was highly commendable. So we've got to find ways of doing this, but let's make sure that accountability on the supervision of banks is there.
Thank you, Lord Harrison. Our next speaker is Ms. Sharon Bowles from the European Parliament. Ms. Bowles.
Thank you very much. I've just been sort of prompted to respond to some of the things that has been said about whether the European Parliament could do more scrutiny. I think we do quite a lot already, but you have to bear in mind we've had about 50 pieces of legislation to do with the financial markets to deal with as well. We already have, I think, something like 4 times as many meetings as any other committee in the Parliament. So bear with us. We have had about 7 ministers already come to an economic dialogue, and we've also had other meetings that are non-web streamed. You have to bear in mind, sometimes we get more out of them when it's not public and web streamed than when it is. And then we have to worry about, well, what do we do with that information? But we do try. And we certainly quiz commissioners, again, both in public and private. I think I'll admit that we're squeamish in our resolutions when it comes to singling out a particular member state, but that's usually because the MEPs from that particular member state and various others and ministers will gang up on us, telling us not to do that. So maybe we have to learn to be a little bit more robust in that. But I mean, we have gone on and on and on, for example, about fiscal multipliers. I'm sure Ollie Rehn is praying that we never ask him again about them. But you also have to realise that a lot of these issues are also very much on the political divide, as we found out for ourselves in the discussions that we had in the meeting previously in the European Semester Week. So the left thinks differently from the right on these things, and that can be challenging. doing. We scrutinise the country-specific recommendations for spillover, and we use that scrutiny and intelligence in legislation in order to pave the way for more and better scrutiny, ideally with teeth, because this is a travelling process and it's ongoing. We met actually with the committee finance chairs in a discussion meeting in the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee when we started out work on the two-pack, so we involved the national parliaments there, and I'm certainly open to trying to experiment with more and better ways to do that, maybe by video link so people don't have to travel. We are also hoping to try and get in earlier on the stability and convergence and national reform programmes by having a semester that's going to be in April of this year, because as we keep doing these things as we go around the semester again, we have to work out how to get in ever earlier, and also we have to press the Commission at times to give us more time. And finally, in the two-pack, which we did settle last week politically, we have extended the concept of the Bureau of the Committee having confidential briefings. We have this from the European Systemic Risk Board. We've now established that principle in having confidential briefings with regard to programme countries. I mean, this is not done to political coordinators, but it is, we are pushing the boundaries as far as we can, but all suggestions welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bowles. And our last contributor this afternoon is Mr. Kistis Glavekas. And I think you also want to refer to the forthcoming Lithuanian presidency as well, Mr. Glavekas.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues, it is a great honor for me to congratulate Ireland on this 7th successful presidency of the Council of the European Union. Please accept our sincerely gratitude to the Irish colleagues for the well-organized, warm welcome and traditional Irish hospitality. Today we have met here in Ireland in the beginning of this year to discuss very important European Union budget and finance questions. I hope that springtime emotions which we could feel here will contribute to the implementation of the ideas and decisions accepted during this meeting. As you know, in the second half of the year, Lithuania will hold the presidency of Council European Union. In the name of the Budget and Finance Committee of Lithuanian Parliament, I would like to invite all of you to participate in the next meeting of Chairman of Finance Committee of National Parliaments, which will take place on 15 to 16 September in Vilnius. The topic we would like to suggest discussing in prevention of smuggling of goods subject to excise and custom duties. We will have a good opportunity not only to discuss the questions put in our agenda, but also to analyze the emerged new issues and challenges in the finance and economics of the European Union. Looking forward to meet you in Vilnius in September. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glavekas. We look forward to going to Lithuania in September, and thank you for giving us notification this evening. So if I could maybe ask Professor Halleberg to address the questions put in, and if you wish to make some concluding comments as well, please do so.
All right, thank you. The first question concerned how many committees debate the recommendations from the Commission and from the Council. You got the gist of really my recommendation, which is that many more should. And that's one reason why I'm happy to be here, is I hope that people see this and say there needs to be more of these sorts of debates, because there just haven't been that many. The reason why, I should say, I know the your second question on your parliamentary council, that's something I'm not involved with, so I can't answer if it's in April how things go, but there may be others here who can address you during the coffee break and give you more direct information on that. In terms of, is my suggestion dangerous to involve Eurozone member only to deal with certain types of issues? I mean, we've already made the decision that in the Council, under the Treaty of Lisbon, there are certain procedures that are only Eurozone countries, if you're a member of the Eurozone. And there should at least be a discussion of what this then implies for parliamentary scrutiny. I mean, I don't know why it should only be the council and not necessarily the parliament on some things. In terms of the role of Parliament itself, yes, I know it does a lot of things. I mean, if anything, the concern always is you have academics come and say, well, now do another 20 things. And you say, yeah, but how many days of the year do I have? I mean, there's only so much that can be done. Having said that, I think one of the ways of thinking about this is, again, more of a checks and balances sort of perspective. That is, and this comes from some research I did, I looked to see what the Commission had recommended over a 10-year period and what the Council had changed. And in about a third of the time, the Council had weakened what it is that the Commission had recommended. And the question is Parliament checking these things, what the Council is doing, what the Commission is doing, and thinking about how the overall procedures work. The excessive imbalance procedure, I've heard a lot of complaints from member state finance ministries about how this has functioned, that the Commission has not been tough enough. Well, that's a member state complaint. Shouldn't there be a European perspective on, is it too tough? Is it maybe too lenient? I mean, these sorts of things. And what I'm suggesting is that there's a role for a European level parliament to be asking the questions about how effective the European level framework has been. I ended up on many topics that were more European level, but again, just to conclude, to get that first recommendation is think about what role your national parliaments can play in this process. And at least hearings is one start, but that there's a lot more that indeed could be done. And please stay in touch if you get a chance and you do make some changes. I'd love to document and report them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I now just move on to the conclusion of today's event and maybe just add some concluding remarks, and we'll bring proceedings then to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, in my opening remarks this morning, I referred to the context in which our citizens continue to bear the burden on a journey of austerity and who need sight on the horizon of a clear social vision. Following on from today's debate and listening to contributors, it is still my firm belief that we must continue to ask ourselves what an overall vision for sustainable growth in Europe actually is, and how does this underpin and maintain the European standard of living and the social model to which we have become very proud of. We've heard today from Commissioner Rehn regarding the winter forecast. We have debated the future of the Economic and Monetary Union, and we've touched on some important proposed technical measures such as bank resolution. And we have heard an update on progress under Ireland's EU-IMF programme from Minister Noonan. We have had a stimulating discussion on the role and size of the multi-annual EU budget and prospects for stimulus within the EU, especially relating to youth unemployment. Finally, we have turned our attention to the role of national parliaments, and we as national parliamentarians are crucial to the evolving economic governance of the EU. And that is very much reflected in the comments and concerns and the energy expended on that issue this evening. We are also central to the need to communicate a better and more open European dialogue, and to fashion a European philosophy that increasingly delivers a social return to all of its citizens. As I said yesterday in welcoming you, Céad Míle Fáilte, the traditional Irish welcome, I would also like to thank the Troika for their support, but personally I would much look forward to saying Slán na Bhaile, which is the traditional Irish goodbye. And maybe we hope to do that, given Minister Noonan's response this morning, at the end of the year, when we do plan to see the Troika exiting Ireland before Christmas. An early Christmas present, we would hope. So colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your contributions. There's nothing left but to ring the traditional bell, which we'll be hearing again in Vilnius in Lithuania in September. So with that said, Slán na Bhaile to each of you, and have a safe journey home.